The crisis in Syria decision point, I'm sure I'm really going to blow your mind with this observation. The operators in Washington, D.C. do not always have the purest of motivation. So-called experts and analysts can have their own agendas, connections, financial ties that might make you reevaluate their positions. That is, if you ever found out about it.
Do you remember the movie Wag the Dog? The black comedy about a fake war sold to the American people by public relations professionals and a Hollywood producer.
Be careful. We're going to have the appearance of a war.
Or do you remember Thank You for Smoking? An attempt to pull back the curtain on how this town really works.
The message Hollywood needs to send out is smoking is cool.
Those two films and their somewhat exaggerated takes on DC came to mind today because of this woman, who has regularly appeared on CNN and other networks.
I travel with groups where we actually can kind of identify the more extremist checkpoints.
Elizabetha O'Bagy. As the Obama administration prepared its case for military force, O'Bagy wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal in which she pushed back against the narrative that the rebels are al-Qaeda-led extremists. She argued that, quote, moderate opposition groups make up the majority of actual fighting forces.
There is a real moderate opposition that exists.
The op-ed was cited just days later by Senator John McCain and Secretary of State John Kerry, as Kerry testified before Congress.
Dr. Elizabetha O'Bagy.
She works with the Institute of War. She's fluent in Arabic.
O'Bagy was a senior analyst at the Institute for the Study of War. But it turns out she also works for an organization that advocates for the Syrian Rebels, the Syrian Emergency Task Force. That was not disclosed at the time. Today, the Institute for the Study of War fired O'Bagy, saying in a statement, quote, contrary to her representations, Ms. Elizabetha O'Bagy does not, in fact, have a Ph.D. degree from Georgetown University. ISW has accordingly terminated Ms. O'Bagy's employment, effective immediately. Even so, the founder of ISW defended the content of the op-ed as rock solid in an interview with Politico today. Still, it's all part of this weird world in Washington, an echo chamber of paid pseudo-experts. A doctor who is not a doctor, writing an op-ed testifying for the rebels without disclosing that she is paid for by a rebel advocacy group, and it all ends up as evidence in a case for attacking.
As has been said, why does the dog wag its tail? Because the dog is smarter than the tail. If the tail were smarter, it would wag the dog. I want to bring back in our panel Dana, Jessica, and Gloria.
Now that that's clear.
Here's the thing. This all reminded me, and this is an extreme example, okay, because nothing that O'Bagy wrote, the credibility has not been questioned.
Exactly.
It's whether or not she was paid,
right.
but what she wrote in the op-ed, the Wall Street Journal and the Institute for the Study of War say it seems all legitimate, even in retrospect. But it does remind me of when the Bush-Cheney administration would place information in the New York Times with Judith Miller, and then the next day, or the day it was on the front page, cite the New York Times as evidence for why Saddam Hussein was trying to build a nuclear bomb or whatever. Again, that's an extreme. That's an extreme example. I'm not comparing O'Bagy to that.
And by the way, we're willing participants in that because, of course, in the case of the Bush administration, they're leaking to the New York Times because they then want to refer to the New York Times, which they say the media reads and listens to, so they create their own
the illusion
storyline.
that it's independent, though, is what I'm getting at, as opposed to, like, if O'Bagy had been said, according to the Obama administration, blah, 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 as opposed to she's an independent researcher. But I know this is how Washington works. I just thought it would be interesting to pull back the curtain a little for our viewers, because it does happen all the time.
It happens all the time, absolutely all the time. And to the way you illustrated it, to show the reality and then to show John McCain and John Kerry talking about this woman in one of the most important hearings that we've seen in a long time should give everybody pause.
But it's part of the rollout, you know. And I don't have any indication that she was involved in any way in that. We now know who she represents. But you see this article, you quote this article, somebody plants this article. We don't know if it was planted or not planted. I mean, the Wall Street Journal just says, they had no idea about any of her other credentials.
But that's what public relations firms in this town do. Is they'll say, we're trying to have this happen.
Yeah.
Let's write an op-ed. We'll get so-and-so to sign their name to it. It appears in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and then people are able to point to this as evidence when it's
like Warren Buffett writing about tax laws, right?
Right.
And on behalf of the Obama administration, right? I mean,
then they named the law after him.
Then they named the law after him.
That's the reward. You get a law named after you.
Not to get too deep into this, but this is happening in this arena this way, but it also happens in advertising, it happens in business, it happens, all over the place with people who are trying to play.
I also think people are savvy to it at this point, and it's part of the reason that there's less. You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think, and that's why I think the disclosure that did not appear originally with Elizabetha O'Bagy's op-ed was so important. It should have said that, and then they still could have held it up as evidence, and there would be none. We wouldn't have done a story about it. I will say we did reach out to Elizabetha O'Bagy, and she did not return our call. Coming up.